Cornelius P. Shea, of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was the founding president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, holding the position from 1903 until 1907. Shea was elected the new union's first president in 1903. Opposing Shea was John Sheridan, president of the Ice Drivers Union of Chicago. On December 15, 1904, 19 clothing cutters at Montgomery Ward went on strike to protest the company's use of non-union subcontractors. Montgomery Ward locked out the remaining workers. Sympathy strikes by tailors and other unions quickly broke out, placing some 5,000 workers on the picket line, including 5,000 Teamsters. The Employers Association of Chicago, an anti-union group, put up $250,000 to combat the strike and brought in hundreds of African-American strikebreakers from St. Louis to work as Teamsters. When Shea was accused of taking bribes to keep the strike going, another 25,000 Teamsters walked off the job in a sympathy strike on April 25, 1905, paralyzing grocery stores, warehouses, railway shippers, department stores, and coal companies. Shea and 10 local Teamster presidents were indicted by a grand jury on 6 counts of conspiracy to restrain trade, commit violence, and prevent citizens from obtaining work. When Shea finally appeared before the court to face charges, he answered every question with the stock reply, "I don't know." Eventually was learned that Shea and others had asked for bribes ranging from $20,000 to $50,000 to call off the strike. It was also learned that Shea was living in a brothel called the Kentucky Home and kept a 19-year-old waitress named Alice P. Walsh as his mistress. All of it paid for with union money. By August 1, 1905, the strike was over, as was Shea's career as a labor leader. Wanted for questioning in a 1907 mail fraud charge, Shea fled to Boston, where was arrested and tried for abandoning his wife and 2 young children. He was convicted on July 23, 1908 and sentenced to 6 months in state prison. In January 1909, Shea moved to New York City to help run a Teamsters strike. On May 21, 1909, Shea got drunk and fell into an argument with his living girlfriend from the Chicago brothel, Alice Walsh. Shea slashed her with a switchblade 27 times, leaving deep gashes in her throat, stomach, breasts, and legs. It appeared, said a policeman on the scene, that Shea slashed her until head tired of slashing her. He was arrested, tossed into the infamous Tombs prison, and convicted of attempted murder, and sentenced to 5 to 25 years in Sing Sing prison. He served 5 years. In the summer of 1916, in violation of his parole, Shea left New York State and moved to Chicago. Basically, he became a labor racketeer. He went to work with the political gangster Big Tim Murphy and ran a series of labor racketeering and extortion scams that included tossing bombs. Shea also owned a saloon inside the Halstead Hotel at 202 South Halstead Street, where he employed the all-around bad guy and convicted murderer William Rooney as a bartender. Rooney had worked for Shea in the Teamsters as a professional goon. On May 29, 1917, Shea was arrested for complicity in a payroll robbery because he allowed the robbers to hide out in his saloon. In June of 1919, Shea was suspected of playing a planning role in a bank robbery. He opened a car dealership, but it went bankrupt in 1920, causing Shea's investor to claim he had defrauded them. He then became boss of a car theft ring. Shea created and became the business agent for a fake union called the Chicago Saloon Keepers Local 1. Basically, the union was a front for Shea's extortion business. Saloon owners paid to join or he would blow up their saloons. It was that simple. None of this ever resulted in any arrests until 1918, when Shea was finally arrested for shaking down scrap and junk dealers in exchange for not calling strikes against their businesses. He was tried and, almost inevitably, acquitted. In 1921, Shea more or less went legit when he took a job on the staff of the Chicago Junk Dealers Union and Stationary Engineers Union. When the stationary engineers went on strike in November of 1920 and a slew of laundries were bombed, Shea was accused of providing the explosives and sometimes setting of the bombs. The following year, 1921, she switched over to the Theatrical Janitors Union as the union's secretary-treasurer and business agent. Under his guidance, the otherwise above-board union became an out-and-out extortion racket. When Big Tim Murphy made his move to take control of the Irish-dominated and very influential Chicago Building and Trades Alliance, Shea was right at his side. On May 6, 1922, Shea, Murphy, Jerry Horan, Fred Motter, president of the Chicago Building Trades Council, and Isidore Braverman, member of the Fixture Hangers Union, were accused of killing acting Lieutenant Terrence Lyons, who shot to death during a labor upheaval. It was Braverman who actually fired the shots that killed the policeman. As expected, Shea managed to walk away without a conviction. When Big Tim went to prison for armed robbery of a mail train, Shea joined up with a group of labor extortionists called St. Germain's Bombers. By then, Shea, although working occasionally as a bomber for Johnny Torrio, had become close to Dion O'Banion, and he and O'Banion's man Louis Altieri retook the Theatrical Janitors Union. When Altieri was pushed out of Chicago, Shea stayed on as the secretary-treasurer and business agent for the union. That was in 1924. 5 years later, Shea was dead from complications following an operation to remove gallstones. He was 56 years old. The Theatrical Janitors Union that Con Shea once controlled had been a part of the Moving Picture Operators Union that was owned by gangster Thomas E. Malloy, who was eventually murdered on Frank Nitty's orders. Prior to that, the union had been run by Steve Kelleher, who was murdered by Danny McCarthy in Tierney's Cafe. McCarthy owned the Plumbers Union and then took the Theatrical Union for himself in 1923. Kelleher was no saint either. He started his criminal career as a gunman in 1899. His convictions included robbery and attempting to kill a policeman. Con Shea made as a business agent in the Motion Picture Operators Union. The union slipped out of Shea's hands and eventually back into the hands Louis Altieri, a.k.a. Two Gun Louie Altieri, a.k.a. Diamond Jack, a.k.a. Jack Altieri. Managing the day-to-day affairs of the union was Thomas J. Burke, a crony of Tommy Malloy's and an alcoholic labor terrorist who had an ongoing violent love affair with his ex-wife that included shootings and private detectives. Altieri hailed from Colorado, by way of California. He made his way to Chicago's North Side and went to work for Dion O'Banion, fixing union elections through violence and bribery. Altieri's union rackets grossed $50,000 a month, an incredible sum in 1926, although the bulk of the cash went to O'Banion. Although he was the suspect in at least 20 shootings in Chicago alone, his fellow gangster thought of him as a ridiculous figure, dressed in a high-hat Stetson, leather boots, and occasionally carrying 2 pistols in a side holster. But O'Banion, who was equally mentally unbalanced, liked Altieri and often went west with him to Altieri's massive ranch in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, where a machine gun nest guarded the front gate. After O'Banion was killed, Altieri publicly challenged the killers to a gunfight on State Street at high noon, actually calling newspapers to make sure the threat was printed. That was enough for everyone, the cops and even the remaining O'Banions, who warned Altieri to clear out of Chicago. Moving to his ranch in Colorado, Altieri was involved in another shooting incident in 1933 and was forced to move back to Chicago. He entered the labor rackets again, starting with the Theatrical Janitors, and was called in to testify against Ralph Capone in his tax evasion case in June of 1935. A month later, on July 18, 1935, outfit killers, tired of Altieri's dabbling in the unions, shot him dead as he walked from the door of his apartment house. As for Big Tim Murphy, the gangster who brought Con Shea into mainstream crime, it turned out that Con Shea would outlive him by a year. On 26, 1928, someone had rung the doorbell at Murphy's house at 2525 Morse. Murphy